We've been fighting a long time, and we have all lost so very much, so many loved ones gone. But you are not alone. There are pockets of resistance all around the planet. We are at the brink. You have no idea how important you are. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Ave Maria Stella, Dei Mater Alma, atque semper Virgo, Felix Telipor.
Welcome everybody back. Steve coming in with Sense Fidelium with our special guest as probably about third or fourth, but I lost count after one. Aaron Seng of Tradivox. Welcome back, bud. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me again, Steve.
Thank you for doing what you're doing, because what we got for y'all out is what Leo XIII said, and I quote, "Knowing Canisius was synonymous with preserving the Christian faith." And Aaron with Tradivox has brought back the Canisius Catechism, which I'll let him tell more about this. Who is he? Why is it important? And a certain pope used to just say the Canisius. Aaron, who was St. Peter Canisius?
St. Peter Canisius, the great German Jesuit. That's a good.
Wait a minute, he's German? We're done.
That's right. It's like the both things. Well, Dutch technically. So in the Netherlands, he's a native.
I was just kidding. I was trying to insult the Germans, but I'm just
a Rhinelander. Well, that would include me too. So I'll try not to take it personal. But yes, no, he's a combination of things that don't seem to go together so much anymore today, right? You have a Rhineland background and a Jesuit, and incredibly Orthodox. He's a patron, becomes the patron saint of catechists. Catechumens, also those learning the faith. He is, as not only Leo XIII, as you point out, but other popes have pointed out, his name kind of becomes synonymous with catechism and catechesis. He is one of the great teachers of the faith, certainly the most outstanding, alongside Robert Bellarmine, his brother Jesuit, of the Reformation period, the Catholic Counter-Reformation.
And speaking of Bellarmine, the Catechism of Bellarmine, stop me if I'm incorrect, Council of Trent thought about making that the main catechism for the church, and he said if he knew that Peter wrote a catechism, he would have never done it.
That's right. Yes, they're working kind of side by side, but some nations apart from one another. And by the time Bellarmine had learned that, yes, Peter Canisius had already written not one but a few catechisms, he did. We put that story in the preface of this volume. Where are we on? 9. Volume 9 of the Tradivox series, which contains 2 of Canisius's catechisms. Certainly the most beloved, most well known, the most widely disseminated. He also has the honor, Peter Canisius, of being still being the most highly published Dutch author in all history of print. His catechism was an international bestseller almost overnight, and he remains the most widely published Dutch author.
I wish I had a Michael Myers video of "and the Dutch."
And the Dutch, that's right. He's taken as the patron really by the Germans. So I do some constant patron saint robbing in that regard with our German family. But
I mentioned a recent pope who just died. He sung the praises of him too.
That's right. Benedict XVI was interviewed about catechesis, several times over his pontificate, and also pretty much any time that Peter Canisius' feast rolled around, he would give a homily or speak to his significance historically, but most importantly, and of course dear to his heart, was his role in Germany. I mean, Peter Canisius is the reason that there are still Catholics in Germany. If there are any Catholics in Germany, it is likely they have some direct indebtedness to Peter Canisius, because he, upon entering the Jesuits, 1543, he's sent almost immediately to Germany to establish the first Jesuit house there on the ground in the Archdiocese of Cologne. Some have perhaps seen the amazing pictures or been there personally. The Kölner Dom, the great cathedral of Cologne, it was the tallest building in the world for many years, among other things. But it is a masterpiece of Gothic architecture. And this Archdiocese of Cologne, was also a center for the university. That's, of course, why Peter Canisius is first on site there. And then the Jesuits, with such an emphasis on study as well as teaching and missionary labors, Canisius is seen as, very, very promising in all those roles. And so he's sent to establish the first Jesuit house there in Germany. But of course, Germany is having some problems in the mid 16th century.
Like the story of German history.
Yes, it's just an incredibly tumultuous period. You have, of course, with the all of the fallout from the Protestant revolt, which is burgeoning there, and it's kind of a hotbed, for these heretical ideas, and then their dissemination as well through print, especially, which at this time is kind of coming into its own in terms of the mechanization. So you have, the beginnings of more efficient means of mechanized print, and so there's this disseminating of heretical ideas, and the same for the Catholic. But into the midst of all that, you have wars. I mean, Germany is ravaged by many of them are confessional wars. They're religious wars in nature, or at least have that character. But a lot of it is older than that. It predates the Protestant revolt. It predates some of these heretical ideas. In fact, in many cases, they're kind of borrowed as justifications for wars being fought on other lines, property related, wealth related, even nationally, national interests, other national interests, these kind of things. So it's well, and I remember, I think you had a conversation. It wasn't long ago, maybe with Ryan Grant. I can't recall, but I remember seeing something you had done where they were talking about this, how in many cases it was a kind of the rich against the poor. You had this strange phenomenon happening right in the wake of Protestantism, where there's this total smash grab operation when you have wealthy nobility and higher that see this new possibility of becoming greatly enriched on the backs of seizure of church properties and these kind of things. And so the religious kind of the doctrinal issues are, in many ways, they're kind of brought in as justifications for some of this work. Not unlike to take a little maybe raise some hackles a bit and perhaps get you canceled, but our own history of nation building on this continent, right? I mean, there's another issue that's certainly a moral issue, but is used and kind of brought in to help motivate a rationale and justification for a major war fought on this here soil.
Always follow the money.
That's right. Yes, so a bit of a tangent, but that's where we find Canisius. He's landed in the middle of war-torn, worn out, weary kind of Germany, and he's also in the backyard of one of who end up becoming the most notorious heretics in the country, who also happens to be a Catholic archbishop. This is a detail I think is worth recalling, and we mention it in the preface a little bit, kind of in thumbnail. But should we talk about this? Is this
go for it? Go for it, yeah.
This is worth digging into. Maybe your listeners wouldn't care about this detail. I find it fairly pertinent. So you have a religious order being established in Cologne. The Jesuits are showing up, on site, but Hermann von Wied is the archbishop, and he's a heretic. So you have this, of course, problem increasingly in Western Europe at that time, where bishops are embracing heresy. Some of them more quietly than others. Some of them not quietly at all. But they're beginning to preach these heretical doctrines from the pulpit. They're beginning to educate their priests on them. Require priests to assent to them at various levels. Require them being taught in schools. These are tremendously confusing times. Is one of the observations I think we need to make for the period. Is especially for Catholic lay folk, right? Who, what do? You go into your parish for mass or for a sermon, an adult faith formation session, and your priest is now communicating ideas that seem to contradict what you learned, last year or what were taught to you as a child. And yet these are things being taught on the authority of the local priest, in many ways, and in many cases, who is referencing the teaching of his bishop, who is the Catholic bishop, or so we thought. It's a tremendously confusing period on the ground. Is what we really have to observe that, and this is one of those cases. So you have Archbishop von Wied in Cologne, who spends years in his see, in the see, the Archdiocese of Cologne, teaching heresy openly and training priests in the same. And into that comes the young St Peter Canisius, who we later know as St Peter Canisius, and he's
with the first name Saint. Yes,
that's right. Comes with a nice abbreviation. He doesn't take up with the new ideas. In fact, he makes it one of his major operating points to oppose these heretical doctrines at whatever level he can. I mean, he's known to do these little town square kind of catechesis sessions. He's hosted from place to place. And the biggest work, of course, that he does, and the reason that German Catholics everywhere are so indebted to him, is ultimately the composition of his catechism. His is one of the first to the fray. He's asked to compose it by the Emperor Ferdinand I while he's in Vienna, and the aim is, hey, we're having so much upheaval in terms of social, just the social strata is so dicey. Our whole situation is so dicey that in the midst of this, we're seeing really every aspect of the Catholic faith is being undermined by these various kind of Protestant systems. No two of which seem to agree with each other, and there's a new one each day. Mm-hmm. And we need, says the Emperor, is a concise, a systematic exposition of the truths of the faith in an accessible way, certainly for priests and instructors, but also readable by the faithful. And so that kind of begins the project, Canisius's project of the catechism, which really is 3 catechisms. We kind of explain this, and it gets confusing. All manuscript history takes some work, but
small, medium, large.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not just he writes 3 catechisms. There's kind of a big one, a small one, and a really, really small one. it's basically the gist. But then they're published and printed under several different names, Latin and translated. And so that becomes fairly convoluted. So we try to kind of spell some of that out in the preface of this volume 9. Tradivox series. But the main takeaway here is that this volume recaptures the two that are the most significant historically and doctrinally, theologically, and that's his big one and his little one, or kind of the middle length one is also called. And those two catechisms are in this volume 9.
I thought it was pretty cool that there's no fewer than 300 editions across Austria, Bohemia, France, Slovenia, Hungary, Spain, Sweden, Ethiopia, India, China, and Japan appeared during the author's own lifetime. You said it was like the first bestseller. I mean, that's incredible.
It was, and it's one of those things where the times asked for such a work, and it was just best suited to filling the need, and that's really why it was. Canisius combined in a time of tremendous character assassination and very scurrilous discourse. I mean, we get really bothered about that in our own time. All political discourse has just devolved into mudslinging, and it's unintelligent, and well, nothing new under the sun, right? I mean, if you read any of the exchanges of major players, I mean, Martin Luther is just profane. It's disgusting to read some of his stuff, but it's matched in a lot of ways by several of his Catholic interlocutors at the time. So that's really the color, the kind of the tenor of the period. And Canisius is very far removed from that. That's one of the most remarkable things about both his public kind of witness, which is seen by many. I mean, he personally brings many Protestants back into the fold, just by the fact of that, kind of his gentleness, his charity. He's never unclear. He never does we'll kind of walk on doctrines that we disagree about and just kind of sing happy songs together. I mean, he's very clear about the difference and the need for right faith in the various articles of the creed and that which has always been held and taught. But he does that in a tremendously charitable way, a very patient way. He has a pastor's gift for shepherding souls. And so when his catechism hits the press, it's kind of all of that and more, because he, as we point out in this volume, he adds so much scholarly apparatus. It's almost mind-boggling. I mean, you get a glimpse of how someone like this can be out in the public preaching and teaching the faith, and then can just rattle off scripture and church fathers references because he knows them all by heart. And then he does that same work in the catechism. I mean, the large catechism has, let me find the last number here because I can't remember it off the top of my head. Let's see, 1,792 footnotes in the large catechism. These are just document citations. It's scripture, it's the fathers. Every
page is like 5 to 8, and each just I mean, this is what, 4-inch pages?
Yeah,
5 pages.
It's loaded. So you have really two things going on in that catechism. You have the readable, concise Q&A format, which is most of the page, and then in the bottom of the page you have all of the scholarly apparatus. Hey, if you want to go deeper on this doctrine, here's these 5 church fathers. These are the texts you have to look at. And for this particular volume, well, really the whole series, we've done a lot of the legwork on updating some of the citations to more recognizable document names, because back then a lot of these citations you would just have an author say, well, as Augustine says, no citation, or you'd say, as Augustine says in City of God, let's say, but no, well, which book of the City of God, which chat,
You only wrote 6,000 books. Which one do you have?
That's right. So we've done a lot of that in terms of expanding the apparatus itself, just so folks can, you want a deeper dive, Canisius is your man, and there's plenty to chew on here.
Yeah, one of the notes you wrote in the preface, there are presently over, for my English-speaking people, there are presently over 1,100 known editions of this work.
Yes,
That's just a cool line with that goes back to the Bellarmine. If I knew that he was writing a new catechism, I would have simply translated Peter's catechism from Latin into Italian. Just, and his is great. You do this catechism, you do Bellarmine in this catechism, you don't have to worry about that one. Those ones converted countries.
They do. They come decorated,
Yes.
right? They're highly decorated catechisms. Yes, that's one of the most significant aspects of just the Tradivox collection generally is exactly what you say. You have texts that have stood the test of time, as it were. They come with battle medals, pinned to the breast already, of saying these texts made the difference. They made an internal difference for many souls over the last however many centuries any one of these catechisms has, to its name. And Canisius and Bellarmine, as you point out, those are two catechisms that they've never gone out of style. They've never gone out of print. You have so many hundreds of editions over all these centuries, and yet why do they continue? Why does any catechism continue to be relevant? Well, because it's the faith, right? Is the faith relevant? Well, then a simple, clear distillation of Catholic doctrine, faith, and morals is going to retain this kind of instant classic status, and some are going to be brighter lights in the firmament of the Catholic manuscript tradition than others. And that's really been our focus, is trying to find the brightest of those lights over the last millennium and stack them up against each other. And Canisius, of course, he's wonderful.
On a side note, everyone's worried about things that might happen in the next month or so. Nobody from Rome is going to cancel you buying these books and teaching your kids or yourself in your house. So you want something that they can't do anything for? I would get the books from Tradivox at your house and just say, you can always educate yourself. The Japanese went through 2 centuries of not without priests. These are literally gold on paper. So just throwing that out there for this going. You talk about catechism. You got one catechism that you were going to get killed for if you had it on your person. And you got things like this that literally converted entire countries. So make the investment.
They're tremendous. I appreciate the plug there, Steve.
It's just, yeah.
It is. It's
check cleared.
That's right. No, we see the value as well today. Not just for, obviously the content is gold, as you say. The historical significance is tremendous. And of course, we're doing a top shelf binding and all of these things just because they're monuments. These are monuments to Catholic faith and morals. They're monuments to the enduring nature of the faith across time and space. Here we are. You can pull a catechism from, North Central Africa 8 centuries ago, and suburban America just a few decades ago, and there's this remarkable continuity of doctrine across space and time. But also their significance today as really an indictment in many ways of ways in which we've parted from that deposit in many regards. That's part of why I think setting the historical framework for each of these volumes has been really helpful for folks. We hear that from readers of the series that say, well, golly, I not only am I learning things that maybe I wasn't taught in CCD, and that's very strange, but also these things that I'm learning apparently were common knowledge to grade schoolers who were going to the scaffold for confessing these same points of doctrine just a few centuries ago, And so we see the value in kind of painting the picture a little bit. We try to do that as well here with Canisius, because one of the things that marks Canisius's whole, his whole work of doing catechesis in Germany and Austria, in the Rhineland, more broadly, is that he's doing that in the middle of an ecclesiastical battlefield. I mean, it can't be overstated that he's there in disobedience of the local archbishop doing what he's doing. And when he shows up in Cologne, you have an archbishop who is opposing the Catholic doctrine in a public way, who is encouraging his priests to do the same, who is in fact facilitating the spread of heresy in his own diocese and abroad.
And we're recording this on St. Cyril's Day, so it's kind of like an historian all over again. It's the Bishop of Constantinople.
Right, yeah. So 1,000 years earlier, you've got something very similar going on. I mean, so just the point being that we can't look at the saints, we can't look at these massive figures, these are forebears in faith, and just see them through a kind of picturesque holy card kind of setting, as much as that art is so important, and of course we really, I think, having a greater kind of historical appreciation for what they endured, the work that they did, precisely when they did it, is really significant. So Canisius is definitely,
that's a great point, because everyone probably thinks they sit around, they're enthroned, everyone was loving them, sending them pizza, cooking for them, things like that. Most of these guys were living under persecution and hated on by everyone. And even like brought up Cyril, everyone was talking trash about him, condemning him left and right, threatening him, and he just didn't care except for the purity of the faith, as he says. So
that's right, and it's eminently simple. I mean, that's I think the reason that we are so enamored with saints generally, and I think Peter Canisius specifically, is that these men had very simple motivations. They loved Jesus Christ our Lord. That was everything. He was all in all for them. They came to do one job, and they weren't really concerned about the earthly results. I mean, it led to, we talked about this, I think, in the last time that I was on, it led to amazing creativity, right? You had many that were going to really striking lengths to bring the doctrine of the faith, wherever they could in these periods of persecution. So it wasn't like they were just running out and declaring themselves and hoping to get martyred anytime. But on the same token, they weren't afraid of that. And they weren't allergic to criticism from their own ranks. I mean, from their own superiors in many cases. Again, Canisius, here he is. He's his bishop, the local bishop, the archbishop, one of the greatest sees in the country there, who is heavily involved in promoting heresy locally. And here's Canisius doing the opposite, and just calmly kind of proceeding on his way for the glory of God and extension of the true faith.
There's Leo the 13th wrote in his the third centenary of his death, quote, "There exist in effect certain analogies between our age and the period in which Canisius lived, a period when the spirit of revolution and looseness of doctrine resulted in the great loss of faith and decline in morals." He's talking about the late 1700s or 1800s. To deliver youth, blah, blah, blah. To deliver youth, especially from this double scourge, was the goal of this man who, after Boniface, was the second apostle of Germany. His catechisms were used not only in the schools as the spiritual milk for the children, but they were also explained publicly in the churches to the benefit of all. Thus, during 3 centuries, Canisius had been regarded as the teacher of Catholics in Germany. And as that line I meant at the beginning, in popular speech, knowing Canisius was synonymous with preserving the Christian faith. That's solid from a sitting pope 300 years later.
That's right. They seem very applicable today. The same.
Yeah, you could easily say that 200 years later, 500 years later. I mean, nothing's changed. I mean, as bad. Think about it. Wonder what Leo would say today.
That's risky to go thinking along those lines. What would any of the earlier popes say about our own time? Yes, it's very resounding as well when you think about the just the natural consequences, the temporal consequences that were held out for Catholics in a period like this, where in our own time, maintaining the faith has a lot of social ramifications still. It always has in these United States. In fact, I was not long ago, I was at a diocese that had a whole display on. It was fascinating. I don't know if they're still doing it or not, but they had one of the previous bishops of this diocese had a private collection that then the chancery had turned into like an exhibit, like a museum exhibit, and it was anti-Catholic propaganda. That was the collection. Like one of these bishops was just kind of his hobby. He collected these things from early America to I think I can't remember when that bishop was. It was probably early 1900s maybe. And it's just remarkable, it's because that was just standard fare. Any newspaper, any like magazine ads for this or that, keep your kids away from popery, these kind of stuff. I mean, and that's just our heritage. Catholics in this country have really always suffered some kind of social penalty, formal or informal, and I think that will continue. I think that there will be added costs. I mean, we're already seeing some of that, but that'll intensify. And so these kind of historical lessons of those who endured that same kind of periods, and not only kept the faith, but found ways to extend it, in their own spheres of influence. Those continue to be instructive for us. And so Canisius is doing that again, not only in the midst of these temporal. That's the wrong word. Civil, not only in the midst of civil government upheavals, but ecclesiastical as well. Mm-hmm. So you have dioceses changing hands. You have, the forcible expulsion of solid Catholic priests, and then in a few months or a few years' time, the complete reversal. By force of arms, you're going to get rid of the intruders, the schismatics, the heretics. And ask these different religious orders to send priests so we can staff these parishes again. That's going on for, multiple generations in some of these places. And so it's learning to learning to study those who kept their heads in the midst of that, and what did they do? What was their driving motivation? I think that's one of the most instructive lessons from these great catechists of the past, and the common denominator, of course, is that they served Christ first. I mean, we mentioned that, but their first concern is the glory of Christ, the extension of His kingdom on earth, and they just found amazing ways to achieve that, to seek that.
And people's number one complaint, if you ask them, what is wrong with the church of these days? Though most times we'll say the number one answer is catechesis, bad catechesis. So what Aaron and Tradivox is doing, I might have said this already again. Here's the solution. This is a solution-based show in a sense. We're giving you guys information on gold, and we're explaining you why these are gold. Like the Bonner's catechism or anything like these guys were literally going to get killed if they got caught with this. Or in his sense, he went through all these revolutions where I would say, Aaron, would you say I'm wrong on this? They would probably the adversaries were smarter and more violent than anyone we could come in contact today. I mean, you're not having the Lutherans or Baptists coming and threatening like they did back then, or the Calvinists, even the hung, drawn, and quartering in England, but they did that in the Dutch areas as well, some areas. You're not having this. You can actually learn the faith and maybe teach your neighbors stuff like this.
Yes, it's certainly, we aren't at that degree of persecution here. Would we ever get there? Who knows? But yes, it should be cause of inspiration and maybe a little bit of conviction as well. I mean, you kind of alluded to this earlier, maybe in the last show, that what are we up to, right? If there is any kind of danger to faith, what are we doing about it? Lay persons, priests, clergy. I am concerned that and reading Canisius just it brings all of this back, because in Germany there's this phenomenon of pietism.
Wait a minute, Aaron. People are tweeting.
Well, yes. Well, that's something, I guess.
They're doing tweet. They're on Twitter. That's doing something there.
Yeah, well, I'm not much up on the Twitter sphere, so I don't know, but I'm sure that's better than nothing, perhaps. I don't know.
Take that.
This priest, among others, who shows up in an archdiocese, defies his bishop in complete charity, and because of that charity, is unable to comply with unjust commands, is unwilling to, let's say, sit down and shut up, among other things. In fact, he's going to produce what becomes, the biggest international bestseller ever, certainly for a Dutch author. 500 years later, remains the most published book by any author. And what is it? Well, it's a confession of the Catholic faith as held and taught, always, everywhere, by all, prior to that time. Why does such a book become so impactful? Well, it's precisely because that was the time that such a book was needed. So he and others, any number of witnesses could be brought for that kind of approach. But these are men who are, again, placing obedience to Christ first. And so those who would part from that obedience, even if they be their own superiors, this is remarkable, right, for a Jesuit.
Yeah,
right? Because Jesuits are all about that, right? Like total unquestioning obedience. Well, not so. Here you have, again, one among many examples to the contrary. So I think it's just a matter of that, placing Christ first, and they're convicted about that sufficiently that they aren't content to allow, let's say, the divine rights of the faithful to be infringed.
There's a lot to that. I mean, Cyril today, Garanger writes about that. And how many years did Cyril charitably ask for Nestorius to convert, to repent, and drop his errors before he basically put down the gauntlet on him? And Garanger writes about that. So we have to well, you guys just go read it. How about that? You guys read. We're talking about this one. You read that Garanger write-up. It's posted everywhere. It's on the .com site. It was kind of like what Aaron was saying too. But before laymen start doing that, you better know what you love. And when you know what you love, that gets that internal, kind of like in St. Apollinarius write-up talked about that. Her internal fire was hotter than the fire that they stoked for her. So the more you read about things, the more you love, and the saints then that, how would you say, that holy fire gets a little bit better than just you don't want to go into Megan Rapinoe, I deserve this style. There's a danger in it. You got to make sure you're grounded in your faith first.
Yes, I think we need a solid intellectual grounding in the faith like never before. I was just speaking to there's a Catholic father in it was a conversation I was having anyways. He was relating that kind of realization to me of, well, I'm just finding that I need to be more solid in my faith than I, just by way of necessity, really, in our time. Not only because of St. Peter's constant admonition, always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that is in you. That's always germane. That's always pertinent. But I think in our own time, when whether they're personally present or not, we have a lack of good teachers. That's becoming apparent. And that's precisely when the catechism genre kind of gets its legs, is at that same kind of juncture in many nations that had been Catholic, like in England's case, for 1,000 years, that suddenly are just being lost. Whole major regions, swaths of human population that had just been Catholic, had always been, they just, that's all they remember. They generations back and back and back. In estates, family estates, they're just of course, we have one or many chapels, on site, because this is just how it's always been. And then, all of a sudden, in a generation or two or three, this massive loss of faith geographically. And with that, the loss or expulsion of sound teachers, the in-person men, ordained men to come and teach the truth, the extension of the charism, of the bishop to teach. And in their place, the catechism, really, that's part of why the catechism becomes such a hot ticket item in those years, is that the catechism becomes what they call the dumb preacher. You can hide a catechism a lot easier than you can hide a priest. You can carry one around a lot easier than you can transport a priest, to and from. So
come on, finally get on my back. We're going.
Let's just stash him in the back seat here, and we'll just throw some sacks over and hope nobody asks any questions.
Quiet down there.
There's just potatoes back there. That's right.
No, and you can read it to your family over and over and over again. So you got St. Peter sitting at your house every day. If you get this book, teaching your family the knowledge of a doctrine of a church, helping you become a saint. So get this for your family, buy it for your seminary, buy it for your priest, buy the series. I'm all about getting the series. Everyone talks about a catechetical problem we have. There's a reason why the catechism in a year series is number one. Here are some solid catechisms. Not trashing any other catechism. I'm not trashing a thing. Get them and read them, because there's some great ones just for kids in this series.
Yes, that's one of my favorite things, is that the catechisms, among the thousands, that have been issued over the last several centuries from every continent, with the exception, I guess, of the Antarctic. Boy, that's the next thing we gotta get, is some priest or bishop to go promulgate a catechism from the frozen regions of the globe. I think that would make it, that would round it out. But no, these texts have been composed with different audiences in mind, both at age level, at reading level, comprehension level. Some with more pictures, some with more stories, some with more scripture, some with more fathers. Some, it's a very broad sampling. That's one of the strengths. And that is also why, the final volume of the collection, volume 20, has to be an index just by itself. It is a standalone index volume, because it does the work of allowing all of these texts to talk to each other. It's a major undertaking to cross-reference, as you might imagine. But it does that. And it's remarkable. The series is remarkable in its display of the continuity, of doctrine, as we've kind of said. And for the same reason, it comes as something of a surprise to a lot of people who have, I think, of course, falsely, but I'm not sure really where this notion comes from. But there are a lot of accusations, right, that the church doctrine, specifically, settled doctrine, can change from time to time or place to place, depending on local circumstances and these kind of things. And what we see is quite the contrary, right? Through history, you have these texts that are, you can't get a more divergent context from where these different catechisms come from, not just time period, but geographically, right? You have the North American martyrs using these texts, laboriously working to master pagan indigenous languages so that they can have a text. And then you read the thing. Well, this doesn't say anything new, right? you have these classic principles of faith and reason. The classic application of moral conduct that stems from this doctrine, this divine doctrine that the church has retained over time, and the continuity is remarkable across time and space. So that's one of the great strengths of the series as a whole.
So give us the final pitch on why should people get St. Peter, well, all in general, but St. Peter is specifically.
Yes,
Why,
we're talking
why
about
you bring him into your home?
That's right. Canisius, this volume is, I think, the pairing of the two Canisius catechisms together, which has never been done in print. So we have, most of the book. I'll hold it up here for those watching. Most of the book is the large catechism that goes from, front to here is the large catechism. And then you have what's almost kind of a glorified appendix, really, of the small catechism. And it is as the title belies, is a really condensed, highly reduced, highly distilled iteration of the first one. Follows the same pattern. Canisius and Bellarmine and others used the threefold pattern, was kind of the common catechetical model at the time. And so you have really best of both worlds. One that's they're both Q&A format, but Canisius does a lot more legwork, excuse me, in the large catechism. In the small one, it's just more highly distilled, even memorizable answer length. So for that reason, yes, this one's fantastic. Canisius has been known for centuries as, the patron saint, the great patron saint of catechists and catechumens, and this is why. This is precisely why. What you hold in this volume is why. This is the catechism in many ways that saved Catholicism in the Rhineland. It could do so again.
Links will be underneath in the show notes. Obviously, again, get the subscription, get one for your priest, seminary. That's all I was giving in Lent. Get something, help educate your priests a little bit. They might not know of this. Not saying that they're dumb, but give them a little bit. Get something for your seminary as well. Do something that someone wants to do something. Here's some solutions. Aaron, appreciate your time as always. We'll do another one again soon, I'm sure.
Let's do it. Appreciate it.
Take care, man.